Friends, we continue this morning with our second sermon in the new series in churchwide book study that we're doing on Gary Moon's Apprenticeship with Jesus. Last week I talked about what an apprentice is and was, especially in the ancient world. An apprentice is simply someone who assimilates the way and manner of life of the master. And we are called to be Jesus' apprentices, which means assimilating Christ's very manner and way of life. And of course, I ended my sermon last week by saying that it does require two things of us if we're going to be true apprentices, and that is commitment and time. Unless we are totally committed to doing this and to spend time with our Lord every day learning of Him, well, we can't be apprentices. We can be admirers of Jesus, but we really can't be the apprentices that we are called to be. This morning I want us to reflect for just a few minutes on a theme that does recur throughout Mr. Moon's book. And our readings this morning were taken from Genesis 1 and Colossians 1. And the theme that we're going to talk about is the Imago Dei, or the image of God. And Genesis 1 says that God set human beings apart from all other creatures, making human beings in His image and in His likeness. Now, by the way, that verse alone, everyone, was like a meteor that crashed into the ancient world. You think about our concepts today like human rights, human dignity, equality, justice. All of these concepts that we absolutely take for granted, even among the non-religious. Those concepts have their origin right here in Genesis chapter 1. If it weren't for Genesis 1, I would argue that most of us today would still believe what people in the ancient world believe outside of Judaism. Go read Aristotle. Go read some of the pagan philosophers in the ancient world. Here's what they thought. You go outside, it's obvious that there is a hierarchy in creation. There are predators and there are prey. There are mice, there are eagles. There are things that fly, there are things that creep. There's this obvious hierarchy. And so Aristotle and others like him, even older than him, said, well, if there's a hierarchy in creation and human beings are a part of this creation, then it follows that there must be an inherent hierarchy among human beings. Some should be predators. Some should be prey. Some should be royalty. Some are born to be slaves. Some are born to be in between. In other words, in the ancient world, people believe that some should have more dignity than others, more equality than others. And yet, Genesis 1, and everybody, we're still trying to catch up to its meaning. Genesis 1 just shatters those assumptions and says, no, all human beings, from the highest to the lowest, deserve equal dignity because they are all made by the same Creator, God. But the question I want us to think about for the next few minutes is the question that goes like this. Well, how, if we're made in the image of God, how do human beings express the Imago Dei? Well, since God is pure spirit, it can't mean that we look like God in our bodies. God has no body. So what does it mean? Some of the great minds in Judaism and in Christianity, they boiled it down to a few things, and I'm grossly simplifying for us. But here's how we express the image of God. First, we have freedom of the will. We can choose the good. Second, we have intellects, minds, reason, consciousness. We don't just act on instinct. We can actually reflect on ourselves and on the world. And then third, we express the image of God by being co-creators with God. We have the capacity as human beings to create. We can't create out of nothing, but we can create so much out of what has already been created for the good of others and the community. And so when you put that together, The image of God simply means that human beings have the capacity to achieve greatness. And we have seen that down through history, modern marvels. Think about technology and science, the use of language, poetry, art, music, heroism, valor, family, community. Human beings just can aspire to such greatness. And yet, we know that there is a flaw in the human condition. And then according to the rest of Genesis, if you know the story, Adam and Eve, our first parents, they perfectly expressed the image of God, but then one day they decided, we're not going to be God's apprentices anymore. We're going to be our own masters. And the result is that all of us have inherited this disordered self. You know, the church refers to it as original sin, and I often speak about this. We tend to misinterpret what original sin means. Some people think it means that, well, that we're all born evil or wicked. No, that's not what that means at all. It means that all of us still bear the image of God. We still have the capacity to choose the good, to will the good of other people. That's still in us. If we were purely evil, we could not choose the good. We would not know the good to choose. Original sin simply means that we are all stained, as it were, in our image of God. We all have these hearts that have been knocked out of kilter. St. Augustine, one of the great masters of Christian theology, said that, well, he describes sin as the incurvatus in se, which means the heart turned in on itself. And see, that's where the flaw is. All of us have this bent to self-interest. Despite our greatness as a human species, we can be self-destructive and engage in stupidity. We all have these hearts that are just turned within. Now, here's the thing, which is very much the point of my sermon today, is that God did not create us to be this way. God did not create us to have hearts turned in on themselves. God created us, if you take Genesis seriously, He created us to give ourselves away to others, to love others, to serve creation, to seek the good of others, not to seek our own interests above the interests of other people. That's how God created us to be. But yet Adam and Eve, choosing to be their own masters, they've made all of us just kind of fall into this self-interested disposition. So sin, everybody, and this is important when we talk about it, sin is not the presence of our humanity. Sin is actually the absence of our humanity. You know how people will say, well, I'm just human, I'm a sinner. I'm a sinner because I'm human. We have to re-engineer that. Friends, sin is a corrosive on the soul. It eats away at our humanity. God did not create us to be this way. And this means that to be truly and fully human would be to be without sin. I'll say that again. It means that to be fully and truly human would be to be without sin. And now we can begin to understand what Jesus was about. You know, our reading this morning comes from Colossians in the New Testament, and one of the verses Paul writes in chapter 1, and you should read chapter 1 and just reflect on some of these incredible verses, but he says of this, of Jesus, listen, that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. In other words, what Paul means is that Jesus in his own life is the perfect expression of what a truly human human being should be. Yes, Jesus is fully God, not discounting that at all. But what Paul is saying is that Jesus himself shows us what a fully, authentically, truly human being should be. And when we see in his life what he was about, that's what a true human being should look like. That's what we were created to be. What did Jesus do? How did he live? Well, he loved. He was humble. He didn't seek his own will. He wasn't snarled up in self-interest. He sought only the will of his Father. He wasn't afraid of other people. He wasn't afraid of strangers. He wasn't afraid of death. His life was not dominated by these fears. So Jesus was totally free. He totally opened himself up to the love and service of other peoples. That's because he was without sin, and that's because he was, in his own life, the true model, according to Paul, the true image of God among us. So here's the point of how it relates to the book we're studying on apprenticeship. When we become apprentices to Jesus, learning of his ways, imitating his manner of life, loving as he loved, serving as he served, just getting out of our own little egos and self-interest, what are we doing? We are allowing Jesus' own grace to restore the image of God within us. When we imitate his way, everybody, we are becoming the human beings God originally created us to be. Our first parents, Adam and Eve, they chose the path of self-mastery. We're going to be our own masters. We're not going to sit under the direction of God. When you and I choose and commit to leave the life of self-mastery and self-interest, that's what everybody's living like. When we choose to leave that life behind and instead to sit at the feet of Jesus and let him master us and learn his manner of life, we become exactly what God created us to be. To become like Jesus, then, is to become more and more yourself, made for love, made for service, made for worship, made for God. Thanks be to God.